Let's talk about something that I think is so important when it comes to healing from childhood trauma, interpersonal relationships. Childhood trauma can have lasting repercussions that affect our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. For so many survivors, the effects of abuse and neglect manifest in dysfunctional interpersonal relationships as the result of attachment disruptions at crucial points during our developmental years. Childhood trauma can have long-term effects that continue to shape our sense of self and the world around us in adulthood. In my opinion, one of the most heartbreaking consequences of developmental trauma is its impact on interpersonal relationships by disrupting healthy development in our formative years. Abuse, neglect, and family dysfunction can deeply compromise our ability to form and maintain the healthy bonds that we need to nurture us throughout our lives. And as childhood trauma survivors, we learned from an early age that people were not safe or trustworthy when the ones who were supposed to love, care for, and protect us were the ones who actually hurt us emotionally and or physically. Because just a reminder, childhood trauma, it does not only show up in the form of physical abuse, but also in emotional abuse. And because of this, it's not uncommon as trauma survivors to find ourselves in codependent, toxic, dysfunctional, abusive, and narcissistic relationships. Personally, I spent more than 2 decades either chasing after emotionally unavailable people or enmeshed in codependent, trauma-bonded, and dysfunctional relationships. I deeply know what it feels like to feel vulnerable, insecure, and emotionally unsafe within my closest relationships. When I started my healing journey over 8 years ago, I was asked to take a hard look at the relationships in my life. And this is when I really started to connect the dots and identify the relationship patterns that were keeping me stuck in a story that confirmed I couldn't trust or rely on anyone, and I had to just take what I could get in terms of relationships. And because of this, I kept my relationship expectations low and I overgave as a way to ensure my acceptance, and I kept a tight hold on the people I did have out of fear of being alone, no matter how unhappy those relationships made me feel. So over the last 8 years, I have had to make really difficult decisions about some of the long-term relationships in my life in order to heal and break free from my old stories. Evaluating and letting go of relationships that feel unhealthy and unsafe is just one important aspect of trauma recovery. We also have to learn how to rebuild as wounded and hurt people. One response that many survivors have when it comes to relationships is to avoid them altogether. This is so understandable, as relationships can feel really vulnerable and scary for most of us. We have a lifetime of proof that relationships bring heartache, pain, and grief. But if we choose to avoid other humans as a way to protect ourselves consciously or subconsciously, we quickly find ourselves overwhelmed by isolation, loneliness, and longing. Humans, after all, are social beings. We were created to thrive within community. The solution here is not to avoid, but instead to gain the tools to create safe, healthy, and intentional relationships that support our continued healing. So in doing so, we learn how to trust ourselves to make healthy decisions about who we choose to allow into our lives. Because just as a reminder, who gets to be here in our life, in our experience, is a choice that each of us have. Because we were hurt in relationships, we must heal in relationships. We can't avoid others if we ever hope to heal our abandonment wounds. And I don't know about you, but I was never actually taught how to identify or call in intentional or healthy relationships. As a kid, I was surrounded by unhealthy, toxic, and dysfunctional adults who were absolutely unaware of their own unhealed trauma. This was all I knew and experienced for the first 2 decades of my life. This is common in dysfunctional households, as the focus is more often than not pointed toward the unhealthy trauma of previous generations instead of the healthy development of the child or children. We learned from dysfunctional adults how to have dysfunctional relationships, but now it is time to create a shift, not only in our mindset, but also in our lives, so that we can finally see a whole new side of community and connection, one that so many of us can't even imagine. I personally know how overwhelming it can feel to navigate this aspect of healing from interpersonal trauma, especially if you're going at it alone without the support of a professional. That's why I created a free workbook called Creating Intentional Relationships as a Trauma Survivor to help support you on your own solo journey. While this workbook will likely not hold all of the answers to your healing, it's just not possible. There's so much more involved in healing from trauma. My hope is that you have the chance to begin bringing awareness to the relationship patterns that started in childhood and followed you into your adult life. Awareness is the first step to healing. We have to take this step. So, click the link below and download your copy and get started now. And if you are working with a trauma-informed therapist or coach, it's a really great idea to take this with you and discuss with them whatever comes up for you while you're working through the workbook. And if you don't currently have support but feel like you're ready to take that next step, I work with clients one-on-one to help them with the abandonment wound and to begin creating healthy, intentional relationships and community going forward. If you're interested, leave me a message and let's connect.